Hey everyone, Dr. Lee Bryce here with your week 3 video. So let's go ahead and get started. This week we're covering participatory action research and photo voice methodology. I'll provide an overview and definitions rooted in your textbook, and then I'm going to jump into a Housing First grant that I was a part of during my PhD program, where one of the things that I oversaw was a photo voice project. I'll end going over the lit review matrix and sort of some upcoming attractions, which is the interview you need to conduct next week, week 4. And then, of course, your exit pass is linked, and I'll have reminders as well. All right, so participatory action research is sort of an umbrella term within qualitative research methods that sort of encompasses anything where you're working hand in hand collaboratively with your research participants. So you can see here directly from our textbook, participatory action research is an approach in which researchers and participants work as co-researchers to change an organization or system. So sometimes in more traditional research methodologies, the researcher, the academic, is this expert. They're at the top of a hierarchy, and the people that they're researching, the folks who are participating in their study, they're sort of the folks on the front lines, lowest on the totem pole, if you will. And so with participatory action research, or PAR for short, folks are really working to get rid of those power dynamics in order to view participants as co-creators of information and data. This means it's reflexive in nature. You may have heard this word in academic spaces before. It's just a process of going back and forth when you're in a position of power to ensure that people who have less or no power have more of an equal say in creating stuff and the overall process. And so you might hear this term used by professors when they're talking about their teaching philosophy, because a lot of professors aim to have a reflexive teaching process where students are able to equally collaborate in the process of learning. I kind of already went over the non-hierarchical part of this, but because the PAR research is rooted in changing organizations and systems, there's typically a level of activism. So we are frustrated with something that administrators at a university have chosen to do. We're going to do a participatory action research project to create change. There's an activism component there. With the Housing First grant that I'm going to use as an example later on in this video, the presumption is that by showing the data from people who are houseless in the community, it will lead to folks engaging in activism and creating change around housing issues. And so in the case of Housing First, the idea is that we will start to create housing for everyone, regardless of whether or not they have a job, they're taking care of their mental health and physical health, and so forth. In terms of connecting PAR to a theory, this methodology is often connected to conflict theory and Marx's work, because there's this focus on the exploitation of historically marginalized communities, whether that's houseless folks, folks who are incarcerated, or the elderly, which are some of the examples I use later on in this slide. And so because Marx was especially concerned with the exploitation of laborers, there's this easy connection to make with his theoretical contributions to the field of sociology. Certainly, if you want to connect PAR to other theories, you're more than welcome to do so. All right, so if this is an umbrella, sort of big picture research methods, let's hone in and talk about a specific type of participatory action research. That takes us to photo voice methodology. Now, I know that there have been some professors in our department here at CCU who have done semester-long photo voice methodology projects with their students. So perhaps you may have heard of this term before. Maybe you even participated in a photo voice methodology project recently. The reason why this picture in the background of my slides is sort of looks like a photography exhibit is because your end goal, usually with photo voice methodology, is to take all of the photographs that your participants have taken, put them up nice and pretty in some sort of showcase style exhibit. And so it might look something like this picture here. Photo voice methodology enables people to capture their community's strengths and concerns, most importantly in their own words. So essentially, you're giving a group of people, usually folks with historically marginalized identities, cameras, tools, and training how to use those cameras and what you're looking for in terms of the photos they take. They interpret that their own way, they take their photos. You interview them, focusing on the photos they've taken and asking questions about what they captured and what their own experiences are within their community, perhaps maybe what their experiences are with the issue at hand, that thing within that organization you're trying to change. And they tell their story through the photographs that they've taken. The photographs are meant to promote critical dialogue about important issues through group discussion of the photographs. And so when you have this sort of public display of all the photographs that have been taken as part of your data collection process, you're not only inviting your participants to co-collaborate with you on findings and change within that organization, but you're also inviting the broader community to participate in that conversation because you're having a public display of these photographs where people from the community can attend and see these photographs and have a conversation about what's been captured. One of the main goals is also to reach policymakers and other key stakeholders within the community. When key stakeholders such as elected officials or people who maybe are CEOs and running major corporations within your community, if they learn about this issue because perhaps you invite them to the photography exhibit at the end of your project and they're engaging in that community conversation, looking at the photographs, talking to research participants who are allowing themselves to be named, it forces them to create change, to change policies and laws and that sort of thing, change how their organization, their private sector entity operates within the community. And so I cite Wang and Burris from 1997. That's a journal article that's one of the earlier publications focused on photo voice as a methodology. And I believe their project did also looked at the houseless community. That really is one of the sort of main groups that often are researched when folks are employing photo voice methodology. And actually, if you are interested, I have that PDF here. And so you can see the author's names, photo voice, concept methodology, and use for participatory needs assessment. If anyone's interested in reading that, I was going to assign it as a reading this week, but I've decided to make it optional. So I'll put it on Moodle later on, but really focus in on chapter 6 of your textbook because it covers participatory action research more broadly. And then if you're interested in honing in more on photo voice, you'll have access to this journal article as needed. All right. So the last thing I want to say about photo voice methodology before I jump to the example of the project I worked on during my PhD program, the other important thing to know about photo voice methodology is the reason why it's different than other participatory action research methodologies and other types of photo-related research methods, because your textbook will talk about photo projects more generally speaking. In photo voice, the researchers are really focusing in on this acronym called SHOWed. And the journal article that I just mentioned covers this in depth. So when you use the SHOWed acronym for photo voice methodology, you're having your research participants in the interview where you're discussing the photos that they took, you're really focusing on these different questions. What did you see here? So C is the first part of the SHOWed acronym. What is really happening here? The H. How does this relate to our lives? You can see they're using the word our because it suggests that the researcher and the folks being interviewed are a part of the same part of the community and they're co-collaborating together. Why does this concern situation strength exist? How can we become empowered through our new understanding? And what can we do? So I think there's this, I think sometimes in social science research, folks are quick to say, oh, I gave my participants a camera, so this is a photo voice project. But unless you hone in on this acronym and in the interview process, your questions of participants really focus on these things here, it's not really photo voice. Technically, it's part of that broader umbrella term of participatory action research, and you just happen to be co-collaborating and getting your participants involved by having them use a camera. So again, that example I mentioned, housing first and photo voice in Hawaii. And this is one of the pictures our participants took at some point. So I'll start off by talking a little bit about what Housing First is and specifically what it means in the context of the project that I did. Housing First is exactly how it sounds. It's the idea that all folks who might be sleeping rough on the streets outside, in parks, or on the sidewalk, folks who are precariously housed, maybe they're couch surfing with friends and family members, or they're living in someone's basement, but they don't have their own lease and it's really precarious. They might get kicked out at any moment. All of these different situations that are technically considered homeless under the federal government, under HUD, all of these folks deserve the dignity of being housed. Now, when you think about traditional housing initiatives such as nonprofits, maybe shelters or faith-based shelters, things like that, there's often stipulations that come with having folks on the street stay in these shelters. So you have to participate in some sort of labor, cleaning around the shelter or volunteering with the shelter, that sort of thing. There's often an expectation and requirement that folks who are housed through shelters and other more traditional housing projects, that they will be required to seek mental health services, substance use services, and physical health services. But one of the things we know is that if you're living on the streets or you have precarious housing, it's a huge challenge to get to a simple doctor's appointment or psychiatrist appointment. It's hard to go to AA meetings when you might get mugged or your stuff might get stolen on the sidewalk, and now all of a sudden you don't have access to your ID or your bus pass, and you don't have a reliable form of transportation, of course. So how are you supposed to meet all these prerequisites in order to have a place to stay? So with Housing First, the idea is that just give people an apartment, a place to live of their own. And once they have that, if you give them the option, not the requirement, but the option of utilizing various resources like substance use resources or mental health resources, they'll actually do it on their own because they have consistency with where they're living. Their stuff is protected. And it's a lot easier for them to maintain a consistent schedule where they're able to take the bus and make all their appointments. And of course, not everyone who does Housing First is going to utilize the resources that are provided, but most oftentimes that is the case. And I think that's all I need to say about Housing First. Oh, this was an initiative that was a state-funded grant. So the state of Hawaii was doing this grant. They were trying to make it so that everyone in the state would have housing. but we were based out of Honolulu, and that's the most populated part of the state. So that really was the focus. However, there was a city grant for the city of Honolulu that also was implementing Housing First and Housing First initiative as well. One of the major challenges we had in this project was that housing is a premium in Hawaii. It's literally an island state. So being able to find housing for clients within the time frame required for Housing First initiatives was a major challenge, because even if we could find an apartment, oftentimes the landlord wouldn't want to rent to people in our project, even if we were willing to say, hey, we have 3 months rent up front. They just didn't want to deal with folks who were houseless. So that was a huge hurdle. And the other thing I wanted to say, in some cities, like I know Chicago, for example, they've taken Housing First up a notch. They've elevated it, and they actually also provide donated furnishings, artwork, and stuff like that. So folks who are getting housed through Housing First initiatives can decorate their house and really feel at home and take pride in where they're living. That was an issue actually in the photo voice project I did, where folks were housed in their own apartments, but they didn't have adequate furniture. They didn't have anything to make it feel like home, like art and photographs and stuff like that. And so there was a missing link there. I actually have a friend who works for a nonprofit in Chicago. They do Housing First, and her job is to help clients find furniture and art and that sort of thing. And she helps them interior design their apartments, which is a really cool sort of next step in Housing First. All right, so what did this project look like? Well, one of the things that I didn't take into consideration, this is a PowerPoint from a conference presentation my colleagues and I gave all the way back in the summer of 2016 on our Hawaii Pathways project, which was the photo voice component of our state Housing First grant. Now, I will say I'm not going to put this PowerPoint deck on Moodle, because it's not only mine, it's also other people's, including the lead researcher on the project. And so I don't have their permission to share the slides on Moodle with you all and make them downloadable. Obviously, this project is really old at this point, so I have lost regular contact with these folks. So I'm just going to share it here for educational purposes in our video. All right. So one of the first things I didn't really think about, or I sort of took for granted as being common sense when I was starting this project, is like, oh, everyone surely knows how to use a camera. Well, actually, you can't assume everyone, especially folks from historically marginalized communities, knows how to use a camera. Especially in this project, we gave participants digital cameras. So after recruiting participants, the first thing you want to do is you want to do a couple of sessions where you're training folks on how to use a camera, the basics, nuts and bolts, what the expectations are. So what kind of pictures are you hoping they'll take? Usually you leave things really vague. You don't want to lead your participants to take pictures that they think you want, but you do want to explain that they should be telling their stories of their day-to-day experiences within their community through photography. And then you want to have some practice sessions where they actually have the cameras with you there and they're practicing taking pictures, just to make sure that they know like sort of the logistical aspects of participating in this study. And so you'll see here that the first part of the slide deck is just us going over welcome, what the meeting's going to cover, what is photo voice, and you can see we have the acronym here. The purpose of the study, the benefits, the risks. A lot of this stuff is some of the stuff you should have covered in your city training on ethics, right? Explaining the potential harms and benefits to your participants, what they'll be doing, and all of this stuff. And you can see we had 2 training sessions with our participants. Now, here we provide examples from other people. This was a Housing First photo voice project in another city. So we use this as an example, sort of a non traditional lit review, if you will, for our conference presentation, where we're showing our audience what other folks have done in the past when they implemented photo voice methodology with the houseless community. And then this gets into our research that we did. This was one of the preliminary interviews that were conducted before I actually was doing the photo voice part of our Housing First grant. And so here, this is someone taking a photo of a bus stop, because if you're houseless, oftentimes the bus is one of your main forms of transportation. And so you might spend a lot of time at bus stops, trying to get to doctor's appointments, trying to visit family and friends, that sort of thing. The participant said, it's showing the different mix between the whites and the Asians and the tourists and what's happening in Hawaii. They think, oh, gee, they could get a job or they could do this. They're just tourists. They have no idea how expensive it is to live here. And the fact that people are waiting 5.5 years to get into a place, or 3.5 years or whatever, they're told when they get off the flight or the boat, don't be giving money to the homeless people because all they do is do drugs. So really wanting to dispel this myth that if you're houseless in Hawaii, it must be because you're a drug addict, when in reality, it's just the fact that housing is so expensive there. And that's true of a lot of major metropolitan areas in the United States. This is one of the interviews I participated in. So this person is taking a picture of, I believe this is a library, and they spend a lot of time there because the library has AC and it's free and open to the public. You can imagine how hot it would be being houseless in a really warm climate like Hawaii. And so this participant said, I would take a nap. I would lock my bike to that railing. There's a mat in front of the door. There's a crack on the floor between the door and the floor, and the building is air conditioned. So when you're lying there on the mat, it cools you down. Again, maybe not something you might think too much about, especially if you have never lived in Hawaii or California, Arizona. But fighting the heat is a major issue for the houseless community, and one of several reasons why everyone deserves the dignity of having their actual own apartment and having real shelter, because it's really a public health issue at that point. Now, here's someone who we housed, and this is a picture of the lanai, or their back deck in their condo. When I feel like I'm creative, I feel better, especially like plants or something, because they are alive and I can't have a pet. So this is my pet here. They're doing really good too. And so this is sort of starting to get at the idea that not only is it important for folks to have the dignity of having their own apartment, but also being able to have the stuff that they want. So being able to have pets and plants and artwork and that sort of thing is an additional level to the Housing First initiative. It really helps with mental health, physical health, all that stuff. You can see here in this picture that this person has a shitty little bed with no sheets or anything like that. And so that's why I really think it's so important, the work my friend's doing at her nonprofit in Chicago, where they're helping supply folks who have been housed with sort of those things that you need as part of your household. You can see this person here. I won't read all the quotes for the rest of this, but this person here, once they were housed, they were able to go to AA meetings more regularly. So it's not required, but now because they have that stable housing, they're able to take advantage of some of the resources they've been presented with through the Housing First initiative. Okay. This is just going over more stuff related to the meetings that we had with folks to get them started. Now, of course, if you're going to do your own photo voice methodology, you don't always maybe need to provide as much information and training on how to use a camera and what the expectations are for the photographs your participants are going to take. Certainly, if you're working with an elderly population, you'd want to do that really in-depth training. But, if you use the other example I provided of college students getting involved, they're going to know how to use a digital camera, right? Um, and so you don't want to treat your participants like they're stupid, but you want to provide them with adequate training so they don't get frustrated throughout the process. And so, sort of think about the people you're recruiting and the participants that are important to your study and what their training should look like. Because, the way they're being treated by you is really important as far as maintaining that equilibrium, treating them like co-collaborators, not like they're being studied upon by some really smart researcher in the ivory tower, right? Okay, so I think that pretty much covers what photo voice can look like. And I think you learned enough about the Housing First research that you get a good sense of, what type of populations lend itself to photo voice methodology and how that methodology can be one component of a bigger, really huge research project. Like, think about this was a statewide grant related to housing initiatives in a area where houselessness is just rampant. That's to say that we didn't just do photo voice. That was supplemental data. We also did regular, more traditional, semi-structured interviews. We definitely did survey data, participant observations, where we were going out to the field and observing what houselessness looked like in the area. We had all sorts of different ways to measure houselessness in Hawaii because of the large-scale nature of that grant. It was for the entire state. We had to think about the fact that housing issues are going to look different in urban Honolulu compared to rural Kauai or something like that. All the different islands, in fact, have unique housing issues, whether they're more rural or more urban, it didn't matter. They all had unique housing issues. And so when you think about constructing your qualitative research methods, maybe things are not siloed. So maybe you want to do a photo voice project, but you also want to do a ethnography and collect participation data, or you want to do a content analysis in addition to your photo voice project where you're collecting policy text files from the legislative session and newspaper articles on your topic, and you're analyzing those text files, which you'll do a little bit of collecting text files toward the end of our semester, and you're going to pair that with your photo voice data so that you can tell a full, comprehensive story of the issue, the topic that you chose. It's rare that you'll just do photo voice or you'll just do participant observations. You're usually pairing different types of qualitative methodologies together, or sometimes it doesn't have to be qualitative. You might do quantitative and qualitative data together in the same project. So, and we call that triangulation, which you'll read about in your textbook, where your survey data is telling one part of the story, and then your photo voice project or your interview data is telling another part of the story, and you're starting to see themes and similarities in your findings, but you're getting at it in different ways by employing different research methodologies. All right, that was a lot of stuff about research. So remember that your Lit Review Matrix is due at the end of this week. Everyone did really well with me during their first Zoom meeting week 1. I encourage you to schedule your second Zoom with me during the beginning of week 3 because your Lit Review Matrix is due later that week. And so if you're able to meet with me Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday on week 3, that ensures you've gotten your positive reinforcement from me during your Zoom meeting. You're on the right track. And then that gives you Thursday, Friday to finish up your Lit Review Matrix, adding your 3 additional sources and submitting that Excel file to Moodle on time. Remember, Friday, 11:59 p.m., unless we discuss an alternative due date during your week 3 Zoom meeting. I really don't want to see anyone going beyond Sunday at 11:59 p.m. because we are in a 4.5 week class. All right, sort of upcoming attractions. For week 4, you're going to be conducting an interview. Even though your interview isn't due until next week, week 4, you should really be thinking about and planning for the logistics of your interview because, especially over summer, it can be a challenge to recruit and find someone who can participate and then to coordinate your schedule with their schedule. You want to start putting out feelers with friends and family members early and often to make sure you can secure at least one person willing to participate. You'll need to record them. You'll do all your consent stuff where you ask their permission and they sign a consent waiver. That should have been covered in your city training and sort of the beginning meetings you did where the textbook authors are talking about ethics and that sort of thing. And then you're literally going to ask the questions you did for your smaller assignment. You'll record it. You'll type out, transcribe the recording once the interview is completed, and then you're going to upload the recording as an MP3 file and your transcript, that text file, as a Word or PDF file. Remember, it might be hard to schedule with someone, especially over summer break, so plan. Logistics really matter. Other than that, you have your exit pass link here. I'll send it out at the beginning of week 3 as well. Or maybe probably the end actually. You should be reading chapter 6. The focus is on participatory action research. You should schedule, complete, and submit notes from Zoom meeting 2, that's smaller assignment 3, and complete at least the first half of your lit review matrix as soon as before your Zoom meeting with me, and then the second half of your lit review matrix after your second Zoom meeting with me. And feel free to work ahead. If you have 4 or 5 entries in your matrix when you're meeting with me for your second Zoom meeting, that's perfectly fine. All right, that's all I have for you. Enjoy your week.